Thank you, Madam Speaker. A couple of questions through you to the proponent of the bill, if I may.
Please prepare your questions, ma'am.
Okay. To the proponent of the bill, can you educate me as to any other place in Connecticut, any other organization or regulation that provides a compensation schedule for employers accepting state funds? Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Fleischman.
Through you, Madam Speaker. So the question really pertains more to the Labor and Public Employees Committee than it does the Education Committee. But it's my understanding that there are all sorts of projects in Connecticut where there are state funds and then there are compensation schedules that are tied to the support of the state of Connecticut. So there are prevailing wage projects where if someone wins the bid on that contract, they must pay the prevailing wage. There are various human service providers who work with the state of Connecticut who are permitted to do so only if they compensate their employees in a certain manner. So in short, yes, there is precedent for the state of Connecticut saying if we're going to fund you, we're also going to say something about what we feel the floor for wages should be. Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Buck-Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you again to the proponent of the bill, if I may.
Please proceed, ma'am.
As to the proponent's comment about human services being required to provide certain wages, if he could please give me an example of that through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Fleischman.
Through you, Madam Speaker, again, this is not my area of expertise, but it's my understanding that if there is, let's say, a state building project, and the state hires contractors to work there, they must pay the prevailing wage scale. Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Buck-Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If I may once again ask the same question as to human services being required to pay a certain wage. I'm well aware of the prevailing wage that we have in Connecticut when it has to do with construction. I'm trying to find out, Madam Speaker, if there's any other way that we as a legislative body provide a compensation schedule to organizations in Connecticut that they are required to meet in order to get state aid. Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Fleischman.
Through you, Madam Speaker. I've given the examples I'm familiar with. I am not familiar offhand with examples in the arena of education that do this, and I would point out that this measure before us does not do that either. It simply establishes what is an aspirational schedule of compensation that the General Assembly will get to consider next year. Through you.
Representative Buck-Taylor.
If I may, through you, Madam Speaker, to the proponent of the bill.
Please proceed, Representative.
Since it should not be our aim to waste people's time and energy, what is the expectation of the use that this particular compensation schedule would have for us in the future? Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Fleischman.
Through you, Madam Speaker. As with many things we do, we may have a goal in mind and recognize that we can take incremental steps toward that goal. So from where I stand, it makes sense for us to try and understand what type of compensation schedule will end the draining of talent that we're experiencing right now in Connecticut, where people interested in early childhood get their bachelor's degree and then go off to teach kindergarten or other grades because the compensation for the education of young children is so low. That is an unacceptable problem. We'll need to have better compensation to address the problem. This effort by the Office of Early Childhood will give us the outlines of what such a solution would look like. and then we will hopefully be able to figure out steps we can take to move in that direction. As I said to Representative Minor, I don't expect by any stretch that we'd be able to have such a schedule in place in all early childhood centers that are state funded post haste, but I do think that would allow us to start moving in the right direction for people who have gotten a bachelor's degree and are giving their heart and soul to working with 3, 4, and 5-year-old children. Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Buck Taylor.
Through you, Madam Speaker, based upon the proponent's response, is he advocating that the early childhood employees, education employees, be paid as much as certified teachers in Connecticut so that they remain in the preschool program? Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Fleischman.
Through you, Madam Speaker, I guess first I would point out that for someone who's received a bachelor's degree and passed the praxis exam, they are a certified teacher in the state of Connecticut. They're not paid anything like other certified teachers, but they have earned certification for early childhood education. I do not have an opinion right now on what the appropriate level of compensation is because I really don't know what the benchmarks look like. That's why under this measure we asked the Office of Early Childhood, which has folks with the expertise and with knowledge of the benchmarks, to go out, do the research, and let us know what would be appropriate. Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Buck Taylor.
Through you, Madam Speaker, there have been some reports that we are also losing doctors from the state of Connecticut and that we are losing a lot of other people from the state of Connecticut. So is it the proponent's position that we should also come up with a compensation schedule for those people so that we keep them in Connecticut as well? Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Fleischman.
Through you, Madam Speaker, no. And just one thing to amplify that point. So our education system is not a free marketplace. It has never been a free marketplace. We have a system of public education in the state of Connecticut and across this country that stems from the vision of Thomas Jefferson, who believed that from early childhood through university, every American should have an opportunity for an education so they could be a good citizen, a productive citizen, and part of our nation. That's why this bill is before us, because we created a public system for early childhood. We've consistently underfunded it, and now we have people who are trained to work in that system who are fleeing that system because we've compensated them so poorly. We're not going to solve that problem overnight. But to acknowledge that it's never been a free marketplace, that the system we have is blatantly unfair to certified teachers simply because they're working with younger children, and that we recognize that and we want to start addressing that inequity, I'm proud to stand on that ground. Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Buck Taylor.
Through you, Madam Speaker, my understanding of a free marketplace is where there is something that's needed and someone who provides it. And the free part of the marketplace is that the person who is buying the product is the person that decides whether or not it is of the quality and worth the price. Now, typically what happens with most people when they're being hired, they are interviewed, their credentials are reviewed, and there's a determination of whether or not they're qualified for that position and what they should be paid. I'm not understanding why the proponent of the bill is saying that that's not a free marketplace. Through you to the proponent, Madam Speaker.
Representative Fleischman.
Through you, Madam Speaker, if I remember my macroeconomics, a free marketplace is governed by supply and demand, with rational actors purchasing and suppliers providing. In early childhood education, a huge number of people in Connecticut, perhaps the majority, who are participating by sending their children to early childhood centers or Head Start centers or public schools that have school readiness programs, cannot afford to pay for the early education of their child. So we as a state have stepped forward with the school readiness program, with the Smart Start program, with Head Start, to say we value early childhood education because it sets children up for success later in life. We, the state, fund the lion's share of many of the programs I've just mentioned. So it is not a supply and demand marketplace where one can draw a simple graph and say, here's what the demand is, here's what the supply is, and here's what the cost shall be. Rather, it has been governed by the flow or lack of flow of governmental funding. That is why, if there is a report from the Office of Early Childhood, it will come not just to the Education Committee, but to the Appropriations Committee, because it's important that the Appropriations Committee be able to ascertain what would be the impact and what are we as a state prepared to do to address this issue. Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Buck Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm sure everyone in this House agrees that everyone should have the opportunity from a very young age and till senior citizen land to get the education that they want. What we're talking about here is government stepping in and providing a rate schedule for what people are paying for the services that they want. I know that the state has moved forward in trying to take care of the early childhood. I know that the state has paid a lion's share of the funds. I know Representative Minor has also expressed this concern. Is the state willing to pay the share of the funds that would be needed if a compensation schedule is put in place, but the particular municipality or the particular nonprofit cannot pay that wage? Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Fleischman.
Through you, Madam Speaker. I understood my colleague's statement, but I'm not sure what the question was. Through you.
Representative Buck Taylor.
Through you, Madam Speaker, to the proponent of the bill, is it the anticipation that once this compensation schedule is created, and if it is imposed on the municipalities and the nonprofit and all of the other organizations, that the state will again shoulder the lion's share of that increase in cost to all of those organizations that may not be able to afford the rates provided in the compensation schedule? Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So the question is based on a premise that I just don't share or accept. This compensation schedule is going to be put into a report by the Office of Early Childhood to the Education Committee and the Appropriations Committee. And we will then look at it and consider what steps next to take. I can imagine no scenario under which such a schedule would be suddenly imposed on the various parties who my good colleague has just mentioned. Through you.
Representative Buck Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Considering all the bills that we have around here trying to impose a $15 an hour minimum wage on people, I don't feel so naive that I would believe that the state would not then impose this compensation schedule on people. Another question to the proponent of the bill: there are certain factors that are required to be considered by the Commissioner of Early Childhood when they're putting together their compensation schedule. Is that very much like what unions do when they're doing apprentice and other jobs? Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Fleischman.
Through you, Madam Speaker. I'm not familiar with the reference to union schedules that my colleague has made. What it does seem to me similar to is systems that have been set up in state government at various agencies we have, where people have different roles and there are different titles and different comp packages that are associated with those titles. That's common practice across the executive branch of the state of Connecticut and virtually every state in the union, as well as our federal government. And I think this might be in some ways parallel to that. Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Buck Taylor.
Through you, Madam Speaker, is it the expectation of the proponent of the bill that this schedule would be something that would provide employers with no flexibility once the various criteria boxes were checked off? Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Fleischman.
Through you, Madam Speaker, no.
Representative Buck Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think this bill is well intended. The problem with these bills are that everyone here knows that this bill hasn't been put forward because it was just picked out of the air. The bill has been put forward because they want to have some validity in the future to require people to pay certain employees a certain amount of money. I believe that at some point will end up being an unfunded mandate on municipalities. At some point, it will end up causing nonprofits to not be available for all of those children and many of them do take care of our children, many of them in New Milford, Connecticut. I believe that this is similar to a backdoor situation in that if we can't get a $15 an hour minimum wage, we're going to have the Office of Early Childhood develop a compensation schedule, which in a lot of ways is going to be a minimum wage. For the person on this level, that's the minimum wage. For the person on that level, that's the minimum wage. For the person on that level, that's the minimum wage. I think that we should find a way to make sure that the market works. And the market does work, Madam Speaker. When you're checking out the preschool to send your child to, you find out the ones that have the best teachers there. And that's the one that you use for your children. So all of those businesses that are taking care of the early childhood know that they're not going to get people there unless they get good people there. And I believe that this is not something that we need to intrude upon, and I believe it's naive to say, it's only a study, it's only a recommendation, it's only a compensation schedule, because we all know where this is going to go a year or two down the road. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Smith of the 108th.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've listened to the dialogue and questions back and forth. I just have a few questions for the proponent of the bill.